Unlike its status as an Australian icon, the koala's future is no longer as secure, as large numbers continue to be lost. Although conservationists are working on sustaining the koala population in captivity, the declining numbers have prompted their inclusion on the threatened species list for New South Wales, Queensland and the ACT, a step environmentalists hope will help to ensure the survival of koalas in the wild.
The main risk that koalas face is unfortunately just habitat destruction. So we've lost about 80% of the koala's habitat. The remaining 20%, most of it's actually on private property, so it can't be protected. So that's just why it's so important that we actually do start extending national parks and forests and also protecting stuff in your own backyard. Hopefully their inclusion on the threatened species list will help the koala. Unfortunately, it hasn't been included on the threatened species list in Victoria, which means that it probably will not get a national breeding program, which is what this animal needs. So being on the threatened species list in Queensland and New South Wales, hopefully that means that we'll become more organised with koala breeding in captivity. In this local area, unfortunately, they're not doing much. The best thing we're doing in the local area is breeding them in captivity and then making sure that there is going to be a backup population in case worst scenario happens.
Despite the fact that koala populations have been on a steady decline for over 20 years, their threatened status came as a shock for many. According to specialists, it was the lack of education that has caused the loss of 30% of New South Wales koalas, putting them on the curve to extinction.
Awareness needs to be made. I don't think the government puts nearly enough money into conservation. Definitely needs to be improved. Start to look at maybe putting in more corridors for them to be able to cross from different areas because they are becoming very, secluded into certain pockets. Start to make more and more corridors for them to be able to transport themselves through. I know they've done that, I think, with the cassowary up in Queensland. They need to start to look at doing things like that with the koala as well.
Just over roads and things like that because the males have to travel out of there and find a new territory once they hit, a certain age. And that's when a lot of them are dying, getting hit by cars,
Scary thought, really.
Yeah.
4,000 koalas every year to car accidents, which is a really sad fact.
Despite the large amount of koala habitat that has already been lost, the federal government is considering reforms to environmental legislation concerning land development, a move which could have put wild koalas at further risk.
First of all, within New South Wales, and it will be different, slightly different in every other state, but within New South Wales you have an Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, and under that Environmental Planning and Assessment Act we apply for approval for every project. So that approval is then granted on the basis of a comprehensive environmental assessment of the potential impacts of the development. So we are then guided by the environmental controls. So those documents are usually called environmental impact assessments or review of environmental factors. They describe the control measures that we then have to implement when we start building in order to save the species or relocate them or develop, so for example, nest boxes. So you really cannot give a blanket sort of judgment of the legislation. The purpose of the legislation is to save a rare species that exists only in Australia, and their population is declining, and it is largely due to land development. So we're taking more and more of their habitat and we're not providing anything in return, so naturally they will decline.
Conservationists are now using the koala's fame as a survival tool, relying on public support as well as government funds.
Tourism is great for koalas because they're getting their image out there. Koalas have always been an iconic symbol for Australia, but we can also get the message out to the tourists. So hopefully they go home with a cute story about a koala, but also a little bit more knowledge about what this animal is facing out in the wild.